I'm Matt Guichard, and this is No Holds Barred. In today's episode, we're going to talk about involuntary manslaughter. There are three types of manslaughter. There's voluntary manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter, and vehicular manslaughter. Each one is different. Let's talk about involuntary manslaughter and how it is different. We've all heard recently in the news about the actor Alec Baldwin, and people were surprised. He's been charged with involuntary manslaughter. Recently, the state of California has sued PG&E. What? Involuntary manslaughter. A while back, a police officer was convicted of involuntary manslaughter in a shooting that took place on a BART platform. How is involuntary manslaughter defined? What is it? And why would somebody be charged with involuntary manslaughter? Voluntary manslaughter is purposely killing somebody, sudden quarrel or heat of passion. Their heat of passion overcomes the malice of forethought required for murder. But in involuntary manslaughter, there can be an accidental shooting, an act that's otherwise lawful but done in an unlawful way. I want to read the definition of involuntary manslaughter from the California Penal Code section, and it is Penal Code section 192. Involuntary manslaughter, in the commission of an unlawful act not amounting to a felony, or in the commission of a lawful act which might produce death in an unlawful manner, or without due caution or circumspection. And it's non-vehicle. So this isn't talking about anyone driving too fast. That's vehicular manslaughter. So how would Alec Baldwin, in that shooting on the movie set that we all know so much about, is it in the commission of an unlawful act not amounting to a felony? No. They have two theories. And the theory is in the commission of a lawful act which might produce death in an unlawful manner. So he took a gun that was loaded. He didn't know it was loaded, but it's a gun that has the ability to fire a bullet and kill somebody. And he used it in a manner that's unlawful. And why? Because he pointed it at another human being and he pulled the trigger. So for those of you who have been around guns or been trained in the handling of guns, any kind of gun, you don't point it at anything unless you intend to shoot. So point it at the ground, point it at the air, be careful or safe. We've heard that he's been charged with involuntary manslaughter with two theories. And I'm expecting that probably the second theory is that he fired that without due caution or circumspection. That means he wasn't cautious. So they have two theories of involuntary manslaughter as to what happened. Let's switch over to PG&E. So how could PG&E, a company, a corporation, be responsible or liable under a theory of involuntary manslaughter? So we do know that PG&E controls power lines all throughout the state of California, Northern California, and we know that a number of fires occurred because the wind blew down trees into power lines or knocked down power poles, starting fires, and those fires resulted in the deaths of individuals. How can that be that PG&E is liable or responsible? Well, is it the commission of an unlawful act not amounting to a felony? I would say yes, it is. Or in the commission of a lawful act which might produce death in an unlawful manner, or without due caution and circumspection. So the thought is that PG&E receives money to keep their lines in order They receive money to have, we call it radial the lines, to cut around those lines to ensure that trees don't touch the lines, to cut down trees that look like they're in peril of falling down around lines. So the theory is that PG&E did not maintain their lines and the trees around them in a fashion such that when a storm came through and some wind blew, started a fire, and people were killed. We'll see what happens with the jury in that particular case. I will say a number of years ago, I was involved in a case up in Grass Valley, and PG&E had been charged with misdemeanors for doing precisely the same thing. Not misdemeanor manslaughter, because nobody died, but they collected money specifically to radial the lines, and they didn't use that money to radial the lines. And when the wind came up during the summertime, caused massive fires. Fortunately, nobody was killed. But PG&E, I believe in that particular case a number of years ago, was convicted of 32 counts of misdemeanors. Fortunately, nobody killed, but as we talk now about somebody being killed, and what is the sanction that a company should face? And in this case, they're going to face a criminal sanction. So it's interesting that we look at that PG&E case, a corporation rather than an individual being charged with a criminal offense, and one thinks about, well, who's actually going to pay the price for that? PG&E, because of the case that I mentioned before a number of years ago, was convicted of a number of misdemeanors. It then appears that it puts them on notice that they have to maintain those lines. And here we are, how many years later, where the precise thing happened again for the same reasons. PG&E had knowledge of the problem with that. In fact, the company was convicted of misdemeanors. And here we are a number of years later. Somebody died. In fact, more than one person died. And the district attorney or the attorney general, whomever is prosecuting the particular cases in such situations, has determined that they're on notice. It's either an unlawful act or a lawful act done without due caution and circumspection. Interesting. Let's see how that one plays out. Another that we've heard about a while back was a famous shooting on a platform maintained by BART. So if you all recall the case, and an officer believed he was using his taser, but instead was using his gun, and he shot and killed a man. And he was convicted of involuntary manslaughter. The concept was he did not intend to kill, so it's not a murder. It's not a voluntary manslaughter because he didn't intend to kill, but was overcome with malice aforethought. The fact of the matter is, he made a mistake. That was his claim at trial. He made a mistake. And in fact, if that's true, and the jury believed him that in fact it was true, that he thought he was pulling out his taser, he shot and killed somebody. He's a trained officer. It's not a mistake in the sense that he understands his weapons, he was trained in his weapons. So the jury did the appropriate thing in that case and found involuntary manslaughter. This wraps up our episode on involuntary manslaughter. If you like this episode, stay tuned for future episodes when we discuss voluntary manslaughter and vehicular manslaughter. If you like the content of this episode, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. This really helps with the YouTube algorithm.